Hi, everybody. Hello. Thank you all for making it out on this cold night. Really appreciate, and hopefully everybody found a seat that wanted one. Look at that seat of honor. If anybody wants a front row with arms, with arms even. So guest of honor there.
Oh, these kids.
Yeah, these beautiful people. In case you want. And I'm a big fan if you need to get up and wiggle, and hopefully everybody knows the housekeeping here, which is that the bathroom is all the way back and on your left if you make a first left turn and then your next first left turn without going out the front door, right before the front door. Well done, Karen. So we're just getting everybody settled in. Kate, we have the spot for you. Kate, my fairy godmother, get in here. We got a spot for you right up front. Look what happens when you come late. You get the spot up front.
I know your thing.
One of my 3 fairy godmothers, so glad we had a seat bottom for you. I know only 3. Right, so I think we're all settled in now, hopefully, and thank you all for joining us on Zoom, friends who are on Zoom. We are recording, so I just want to let you know you may want to take off your video so that you won't be in the Zoom. So just to let you know about that piece. Welcome. This is an event that I was really excited about. Some of you may know my name is Nikyta Palmisani, and I am the community alchemist. There's a lot of joking that probably the only one, maybe the only official alchemist on library staff, maybe anywhere. I know, and I'd love to introduce Darren, who is our new director. This is Darren. Person who made up that name. I didn't give myself that title. I just need to be clear about that. I did interview for the position with that title. So, and I'd also love to introduce Karen, who is the chair of our Friends of the Library Board. Karen's here. Thank you. Fundraising, all of our great stuff that happens, and with programs like these. Thank you to the Friends of the Library. So I was really excited about this night, thinking about getting a fire going and getting some warm stories. Many of you may know that I have been studying storytelling recently. Last year, after I couldn't stand it any longer in the pandemic, I started studying with a storyteller named Martin Shaw, who is a British storyteller, and he really tells stories at the intersections of placehood and ecology and myth. And he says, you know, story is what humans, how they tell about place. And so I really wanted to bring that storytelling here to Lopez, and thank you very much to Pat, because we weren't planning to have this event. We were just going to do it in Oxford, and Pat said, wait, why aren't you doing this for us? So thank you, Pat, for making this night happen. And I had been really excited to be sharing the stage with really honored and revered storyteller Ed Sheridan, and also Rosie Sumner, who's been a long time storyteller here in this very place of the library. So I just want to name that we are in the house of story. That's what libraries are, that we are filled with story, whether it's books or DVDs or games or art, right? That this is the house of story. And this is where people come to exchange stories, right? Whether you're borrowing someone's book or coming to convene here and to be in a storied place. And I have a lot more to say about that, but I have to introduce Juniper Blomberg, who is sharing the stage with us as well tonight. Hi. This is Juniper. And she'll be talking more about what she is wearing and our project as we move forward. But Juniper really teaches me about placehood and about storied objects. So thank you, Juniper. She's also personing the Zoom over here. So I'd love to warm us up with our veteran storyteller. Rosie has been working, she worked at the library 3 different times since the 1970s. And most recently was one of our beloved storytellers who read all the stories to children every Wednesday. So what a blessing. And I got to hear her tell a story at the teddy bear picnic. And so she's going to read a poem and start us off. So Rosie, come on.
Yay!
I'm so happy to see so many people out tonight. The word story, is that what brought you out? Yeah. It's so exciting it's best time of year for stories too. I'm not telling a story tonight. I'm gonna tell you a poem. When Nikyta told me that this was about place and environment and ecology and stories, I immediately thought of a poem I wanted to share by a Lopezian named Georgie Muska. And Georgie died in 2009 at the age of 59. She was the victim of glioblastoma, brain cancer, which has taken a lot of our incredible community members, including Hugh, Lawrence, Greg, Ewart, David, and lots of people. I remember the clinic told me that they called the state and said, is there something wrong with our water? You know, why do we have so many people with this? And the state said, no, that is normal for the population. Peggy disagrees, but anyway, Georgie was an amazing writer. She lived down near Iceberg Point with Hank, her husband, and they used to fish in Alaska through many seasons with their young children, Sarah and Joseph, and she wrote wonderful stories and poems about that. I have a few copies of this poem. I'll just put them on the shelf over just beyond the young adult fiction if you want to pick one up.
You can also put them on the stage if you want.
Yeah, I can put them right there. And I have a copy in case I get so nervous I can't remember the words. It's a short poem. One day, I could be the old woman of Iceberg Point, walking alone and slowly, a dog no longer at my side, worried that I might fall down, but going anyway. I'll be confused about where I was born and slow to remember my grandchildren's names. But when I get out here, with the tall summer grass brushing my legs and the tide sucking and spinning the kelp, I could feel a great contentment and even a sense of home. Thank you, Georgie.
Well, as we all know, Lopez is a very small place. And when you said Georgie Muska, suddenly my mother-in-law and my husband, I thought, oh, is that the mother of Sarah Muska? And it is, because my sister-in-law was best friends with Sarah Muska and came to Lopez all of her life, coming to visit Sarah Muska. And so my husband and mother-in-law who moved here, that was their familiar location. So great honor to hear the poem from Mother, because we are all embedded in this place. You know, we are all here of this place. So I have the great honor to introduce next Ed Sheridan. Ed is a fantastic storyteller. And I remember when he first told me he was a storyteller, and I thought, that's a thing? And now I know, of course, that is such a thing. So I feel really honored that we get a story with Ed tonight. And without further ado, I'd love to bring him up to tell the story.
Ed, here's your microphone. We're just going to pin you on a mic there.
Okay. So I can't move around too much.
I know you're a little bit glued to the screen here. We'll just move this closer in. All right.
So how do you pin it on?
It should clip right to your lapel there. There you go, Ed. Give that a go.
Just like Hollywood. Well, maybe I'm the old man of Iceberg Point. Anyway, I'm so glad to see such a great turnout tonight. And when you're a storyteller and something like COVID happens, then you stay in the closet for 2 years, and then finally things start to change. And well, things changed for me when I was in my early 60s, and I'd done social work and training and things like that. And I moved to Bainbridge Island with my wife, Diana. And I'd always wanted, well, I guess I'd realized that I wanted to work with children. And so I basically taught myself how to tell stories. And then I started going to storytelling festival where there are all these people there that were pros. And then I started doing a lot of storytelling in Bainbridge and in Kingston and Suquamish. And our children are a wonderful audience. They are always available, always open to ideas, different things, images. And so my mother got me started on this a long time ago. And tonight I'd like to tell a story from Japan. And it's a, well, in Japan, they tell some very scary stories. This story is included in this collection, The Mysterious Tales of Japan. And some of them are like, oh, really? That's awful. It's not the story. Well, it's what happened in the story. And so I've spent some time in Asia and in the Philippines. And my wife and I were in the Peace Corps. And then we traveled all around Asia and to Bali and other interesting places. And so, but I think each culture, whether it's in Asia or Africa or the US, just has wonderful stories that are told in families, especially by grandmothers and mothers and fathers too. And so I've told this story before, and it has to do with a family. And it was a small family. They were rice farmers. And there was a mother and a dad and older sister, older brother, and the young brother. And so they would always plant the rice, and they had you plant rice and you flood a field and the seeds start to grow. And then I guess you drain the water out of the field and take the seeds and plant them in moist soil. Well, this family found just before the harvest that all the water stopped coming. The rain stopped, and all the rice farmers were in distress. And first of all, they wanted the rice to be able to get through the winter for everybody. And the younger boy, he was not at all interested in being a rice farmer. And he was more interested in a drawing. He wanted to be an artist, although he probably couldn't enunciate that. Well, he had a big appetite, just like his older brother and sister, mom and dad. And they thought, well, we're not sure he's going to make it through the winter. Maybe we could find him a nice place where he'd be well fed. And there was a Buddhist monastery close by. And they decided to bring their son to the Buddhist monastery, talk to the abbot, and see if they'd be willing to accept him as like a novice monk, so to speak. So he wasn't too excited about this idea, but they explained the situation, and they said, well, maybe you'd have some opportunities to do some art there, and tried to make it sound good. And so one day the parents and their son walked to the monastery. It was maybe 3 miles away, and they knocked on the front door, and someone came and they said, we'd like to talk to the abbot. And he's the boss. So abbot came out and said, well, what can I do for you? And they said, well, we have a son who seems to be very interested in art and, finding things in life. And, he might make a good Buddhist. And so he said, well, I'd like to talk to him. So he took the boy into his office and he asked him 3 questions. Now, we don't know what those questions were. But his answers were very right on, and he could tell that he had a lively mind. And he said, well, sure, I'll give you a chance. You can live here, have a good meal twice a day, 3 times a day. But we have to do work here, and you'll be expected to do a work same as everybody else. Are you prepared to do that? Oh, yeah, I'm ready. Well, he really wasn't that ready, but there are times when you don't have a lot of choice in your life. This was one of those times. And he said, now everybody here works, and tomorrow you'll meet somebody and give you some jobs to do, and you'll do your job, everybody else will be doing their job, and then we'll come back for dinner, and so forth. So he just kept nodding his head, which you do in these situations. Oh, yeah. So the next morning, turned out that his job was to chop wood and to clean up around the monastery. And then when he got back after the evening meal, he unrolled his blanket, and inside the blanket, he had a wonderful painting brush made out of bamboo, and then he had a stone with a depression in it, and that's how he would make ink. And he had what we would call a piece of black chalk, and which was black ink powder. And so that's what he really loved to do when he had a chance. So, but he was pretty tired that first night, and things were going quite well. On the second night, things were going quite well. And I should tell you this too, the boy loved to draw cats. That's why the name of the story is The Boy Who Drew Cats. So the third morning, all the monks came out of sleeping quarters, and they had their robes on, and they were walking toward the dining room, and they looked down at the floor, and there were these cats drawn on the floor, and they were quite upset because in a monastery you expect things to be pretty much the same day after day. but they didn't say anything because they were Buddhists. And then they said, "Did you do that, you little?" No, they didn't do that at all. So they just accepted that and said, "Well, we probably won't see that again." And then the next day, of course, somebody cleaned it up. And the next morning, they got up and they walked to the dining room. And they were gratified to see there were no cats on the floor. But then they looked on the walls and there were cats all over the walls. And then they started getting, irritated in a Buddhist way. But on the third morning, they came and they were gratified to see that there were no cats on the floor and no cats on the walls. And they opened up their sutra prayer books. Oh. And there were cats in all of these prayer books, and they were lively cats jumping around and yawning and so forth. And then they said, well, one of the monks said, you're gonna have to talk to the abbot. So one monk took them into the abbot and explained what was going on. They hadn't told the abbot because you don't do that. And so the abbot said, is it true? You've been drawing cats? Well, yeah, yes, I have. I just can't help myself. I love drawing. I love drawing cats. I certainly don't want to do that again. I don't want to do anything that would harm the monastery. And he said, well, I'll give you one more chance. But you do remember when you came here, I explained that everybody has to do a job here and they want to focus on that and they want to focus on their well-being, their sense of peace. And they can't do that when they're seeing cats all over the place. They say, yeah, I do understand that. I'm sure it will never happen again. So he went back, contrite. Next day, things were fine. The next day, things were fine. And all the monks started to relax. We're going to put this behind us, a bad memory. But on the third morning, they got up and started toward the dining room. And, well, there were cats all over the place. So they said, well, we're going to have to take you into the abbot. And the abbot said, well, I'm sorry, maybe you're destined to be an artist and not a monk, but you can't stay here. I'm sorry. You're too disruptive, a member of the community. And he said, oh, yes, I understand that. I'm so sorry. So he gave him a ball of rice and some dried fish, and he left. Now his parents had dropped him off 6 or 7 days ago, and he watched them leave. And he knew he couldn't go back there because they didn't have enough food. So he set off, and he was walking along the road, and he remembered that one of the older monks had told him there was a large monastery 10 miles away. So he said, I'll go there. I'll introduce myself. I'll explain that I already know a lot about Buddhism. And I'll do a good job. And so he started eating up his rice ball pretty quickly because he was so nervous. And then he finally gets toward the monastery. And it's a substantial monastery, knocks on the door, nobody opens the door. He said, this is strange. So then he opened this big door and looked inside, and it was very dusty, dirty, a lot of grass on the floor and things. And he said, well, I before the monks come in from the fields, I'll clean up the entryway, and then they'll know that I'm a good worker. So he cleaned up the entryway. It was quite a bit of work. And then he kept waiting for the monks to come back, but they hadn't. And he didn't have anything to eat, so he thought he might as well go to sleep. So he found the sleeping area, which was quite large, and he put down his blanket and his paintbrush and the little stone, the ink stick, and he started trying to go to sleep. But it was really scary. It was a big room, there was nobody else there. It was dark. And then he started thinking about what the abbot had told him. The only piece of advice the abbot gave him was when he was leaving, was avoid large places, stay in small spaces. Do you understand? Oh, yes, I understand. Of course he didn't understand. Well, what does that mean? Kind of abstract. Avoid large places, stay in small spaces. But anyway, he started thinking about himself. There he was in the middle of this really large room. And he said, well, this is a large place. I think I should find another place to sleep tonight. And so but before he found a small space, he looked, and he was lying next to a series of beautiful shoji screens, beautiful white paper. And he said, well, he was really nervous, and he, of course, decided to paint some cats. So he got his brush out and made some ink, and then he started painting cats all over these shoji screens. And he stepped back and he looked, wow, he felt so good about what he was able to do. And maybe the first glimmer of a thought that maybe he'd become an artist in time. So he went and found a small space, a little anteroom, you might call it. And inside the anteroom, there was a little cupboard with sliding doors. So he squeezed himself into that cupboard, closed the doors, and then somehow or other went to sleep. And then in the middle of the night, there was this tremendous noise, shrieking, and like terrible noise, like people were hurting each other. And he didn't know what it was. And so he put his head in the blanket and tried to not listen. And it went on for quite a while. And then it finally subsided. And when the sun rose, he pushed open the cupboard door, crawled out, and went into the large room where he was going to sleep that night. And he looked, and it was quite incredible. There was blood all over the place. And in the middle of the floor was a huge rat goblin, which is a vicious animal that eats people. But it was dead. That's where all the blood came from. And he said, who saved my life? Who saved my life? And then he looked up at his paintings of the cats. And there was blood on their teeth and on their claws. And he realized that cats had become alive during the night and had protected him and killed the rat goblin. It's an astonishing event for him, like, oh my gosh. Well, there was nothing to do but to leave because there was no food there. And he started along the road and he said, well, maybe I will become an artist, like the abbot said. Maybe that's in my future. I'm gonna find an artist. Now I wouldn't have any trouble here, but here on Lopez, I mean. So he was walking along, and every time he came to a small clearing where there was some huts, he would say, "Are there any artists here?" And they say, "No artists here." You know, kept asking, and they said, "Well, somebody said, though, you need to go to Kyoto if you want artists." And he said, "Where's that?" And they pointed in the right direction. So he sometimes people would give him some food because they could tell he was lean and hungry. So he finally got to Kyoto. They said, "Are there any artists here?" And they said, "Artists? We have nothing but artists here." So he went around and talked to one artist after another and said, "Well, could you take an apprentice?" And finally, he talked to an older man. He said, "Well, sure, I'll take you on as an apprentice. But for the next 3 years, you're going to have to clean the studio in the morning and the evening and so on and so forth. Then I'll see what you have." So he put his nose to the grindstone, and he was very assiduous in doing all of the work he was supposed to do. He didn't draw any cats on the wall or the door or in the prayer book. Finally, after 3 years, the master painter said, "Okay, you've done a good job. Now, let me see what you can do." So he gave him a brush, some ink. He walked up to an empty scroll, and what did he paint? Several cats. And the artist was very impressed. And he said, "Well, I think you've got some talent. So I'm going to teach you some more." And so that's how this young man got his start as an artist and lived to tell the tale. And the story is called The Boy Who Drew Cats. And we only have this story because there was an American who went to Japan in like 1900, named Lufcardy O'Hearn. And he stayed there. He married a Japanese woman. And she and all of her friends had all kinds of stories, and he wrote them down and he put them in a book. And you can find collections of Lufcardy O'Hearn in the library. They don't have it here. They do interlibrary loans. And so I want to thank Lufcardy O'Hearn for capturing that story and passing it on. And my friend Eleanor Burke, who used to live here, who had open mic at the joinery building. And I went to that and I said, "Well, I wonder if they'd like to hear some stories." And so I got up every couple of months and told stories. And I was so thrilled there was such a good response. And people would come up and say, "Oh, I love that story." You know, this would be somebody 45. And so I think there is a universal appeal to stories because they touch us in different ways, emotionally, visually, and that's what I've always loved about it. And it's been a pleasure to tell you this story tonight, and we'll see you again. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thanks for the plug for the library also on that one. And I'm really gratified that Ed told that particular story, just thinking about times where there was drought, times where there was fear of famine, times where food was important, and then times when artists saved the day. So it was a really nice intersection of local food stories, ecological stories, stories that are important to the earth, and stories that involve art and cats. Thank you, Ed. So one more round of applause for Ed. All right, so I'll be up next here. Give me just a moment to collect myself. I don't think this story needs much introduction because I'll talk about it at the end. When my story is told, it's usually told about my husband. You may know him. He was so in love with me that he rent open the earth to pull me under, asking my father in secret for my hand in marriage. My mother, of course, he knew would not allow this. When my story is told, you may have heard it told by my mother, goddess of the grain, the goddess of fertility, the goddess of all things on this earth, the goddess who makes great the land and feeds the people. You may have heard my story told from her grief, the grief where she cried and wailed at my abduction, and her sorrow at my loss. Her sorrow that was so great, she set apart a blight on this earth, feeding no one. All the plants shriveled and withered. All the orchards were barren. There was no more grain. The people went hungry. And thus, appealing to the gods, she sought after my release from this abduction. Maybe you've heard her story told, my mother, Demeter. Maybe you've heard my husband's story, Hades. But my story is rarely told from my perspective. My mother is half of the circle above ground. My husband is the other half of the circle below ground, for this one planet we inhabit. But I am the hinge. I am the hinge point between the above and the below. Maybe you have heard in the myth that I was the goddess of springtime, the maiden of spring, and that my great gift was joy, and joy that I brought to everyone. My mother especially cherished my laugh and my joy, and the way that I would awaken the seeds and awaken the flowers and awaken everything so that it might make new life. And it was in fact that seed of joy that was like a lightning bolt, which I inherited from my father, Zeus. That lightning bolt that awakens seeds and awakens life and gets everything fertile and growing again. Maybe you'd heard that about me. Maybe you'd heard about the day where my mother, so concerned for my health and well-being, had me watched by nymphs, and we were at the seashore and I was playing. But the part of the story you may not have heard was because we gods are more than that. We are elemental beings. We are not bounded by bodies. We are not bounded by linear time. That's a human conception, and that's the way that humans tell our stories, because it is what we know. It's what they know. But that's not how it is for us, where we are both immortal and ever present. I was the goddess of seeds. I am the goddess of seeds. Where do seeds live? Seeds live underground, in the ground. I lived at that place because as elementals, we dissolve into a kind of vast timelessness. How else can we be everywhere on this planet all at once? So I would dissolve into all of those awaiting seeds and the joy and the rapture of them when they bravely break open their husks and force their tiny, vulnerable tendrils up into the dark earth. And that moment where they break through and see the light of day and all of the sunlight and the color that surrounds the above ground world of my mother, who then would make rich all of the food, all of the seeds, all of the beings and plants and animals and people. But I lived underground. And there was always a face, a very handsome face, that I would see underground. And I lived with that face as long as I can remember. The eyes always filled with love. And this face would look up at me out of the dark earth as I was dissolved into all the seeds underground. And I have loved that face for as long as I could remember, always. So that day that gets told so often, when the sea opened and the earth rent a giant chasm, there was a hand outstretched to me. And attached to that hand was that face. That face I knew as well as I knew my own, staring at me, filled with love. No one ever tells you that part of the story. And how my body could only move forward toward his, and toward his awaiting hands, and how our hands laced together, and how in that lacing, in that conjoining, suddenly we dissolved into the elemental timelessness that we are also. Our bodies dissolving into suddenly myriads of webs, myriads of life, like mycelium webs that parted as we went down, down, down. It was like a cosmos, like a web, like stones were stars, and there was so much life. There was so much life underground. There was a vast interwebbed intelligence, which I can only describe for you in words that are not sufficient, as brilliant and beautiful and whole. And I felt this profound sense of belonging, that here was this web that connected everything, everywhere, all across the planet. And beautiful things were happening. And my beloved, whose hand I was holding, kept taking me and saying, and then here, and then this, and showing me. And it was like a cosmos appearing before my eyes. There was so much wonder in watching how the dead eat the dead. We call them decomposers, but really it's the souls of the dead who eat the dead and then make life again, and then make fertile the land again. And they break down everything into tiny elemental pieces, the minerals and the carbon and the sugar and the water. There were vast underground caverns and rivers and watersheds and pulsing rivulets of these mycological webs moving, some of which were phosphorescent and glowing like stars underground. I had never seen anything so beautiful in my entire life. As I said, we gods, we are not bounded by time. What is a day in the life of a stone? In a trillion years, a billion years? What is a day in the life of a fungi? Billions of years have gone by. It's a blink. It's a moment. Time is different underground. So as I was marveling at all of these wonders being shown to me, this vast web that I was a part of, I was so distinctly a part of this web because I was the one who brought the joy, the lightning, ecstasy, the orgasmic moment of conjoining that brought all life. I finally understood where my place was. My mother had dominion over the entire earth. Where was a daughter to go? But suddenly I found my own dominion, my own place there. My beloved in his hand, in mine. Suddenly, I could hear a sound coming from very far away, and it started repeating. And as I listened in a little more closely, I could hear my own name being called again and again and again, and louder and louder. Persephone, Persephone, Persephone! She was calling. And suddenly I realized it was my mother, and my mother was calling me, and she was desperate. I had never heard that cadence and tone of despair in her voice ever in my entire life. And suddenly I didn't know what was happening. And I said to Hades, what has gone on? And he said, we've been here for months. And I said, months, but it was just a moment that we met on the seaside. And he had to explain that time was different. And we slowly started to reshape, and our bodies began to form again. And suddenly I said, no, I've just arrived. The wonders have just been introduced to me. It's not time for me to go yet. And he said, you must. There is something really terrible happening on the surface of the earth right now. And I'm going to take you up very slowly so that you can see. And he took me through a web, a beautiful hyphae, a hair, a fungus that had gone into a root system of a tree. And from the tree, suddenly we were transporting water and sugar. And as we looked out from this tree, from the inside out, we could see that there was a blight upon the earth, and that there were no leaves on this tree, that there was nothing. Everything was withered and barren. This was not the earth I had left a moment ago. The earth I had left was rife with life and abundance, always. My mother provided, always. What had happened in my absence? My husband said, he wasn't my husband yet, but my husband said, watch Persephone. And he pulled up all of those elements, deep from within, rising, inside the tree. And suddenly, in this dark time of winter, leaves began to grow, and fruit began to form and ripen. And it was fat, and it was red, and it was heavy. And suddenly I was inside the fruit itself, and I could feel these jewel-like seeds filled with the most delicious juice. And I said, I wish I could taste that just for a moment. I have a magical husband. Suddenly, 6 seeds appeared in my hand. And as I put them into my mouth and their juice exploded open, he kissed me. He kissed me with that taste of pomegranate, orchestrally exploding in my mouth, my first kiss ever of my most beloved, and this commingling of pomegranate, sweet and tart, and kiss and warm and soft. And I was melting into him. And then suddenly Hermes was in my ear, and the wind was blowing, and suddenly I was with Hermes, and suddenly I was rising upward, and my head was spinning, and I didn't know, was it from the juice? Was it from the kiss? Why am I rising? Why am I rising? Why am I still moving past the mycelium? Why is it still rising and falling away as I move? And why? Then my mother, she was so sad, so distraught. And I had such a confluence of feelings and I didn't know what I could do because there she was. And a second ago, I had kissed the man that I loved more than I'd ever loved anything. And then suddenly she's in my arms and we're continuing to rise and continuing to rise and continuing to rise. And then suddenly I'm in the house with my father and I'm in the heavens and my mother is there and she's weeping and everyone I know is there, all my aunties and uncles and cousins and nymphs and everyone who I've ever known, every god, every elemental is present with me. And my head is still spinning and my mouth still tastes like pomegranate and first kiss. And suddenly everyone is asking, everyone is shouting at me. Did you eat the food of the dead? Did you eat the food of the dead? Persephone, did you eat the food of the dead? Did you eat the food of the dead? And my mind is spinning and I'm thinking, no, I did not eat the dead eat the dead. They decompose the dead and then they turn it into life again. I wasn't eating that. I was watching, I was one with that. How do I even explain that it's not like eating? What are they talking about? And suddenly my father, with the ability to cut through a situation like a lightning bolt, he's no stranger to love. He'd been privy to my husband's desire for me. He knew that my mother would never allow me to be the queen of the underworld, the queen of the dead. But he knew that we had always loved each other. So with a glint of lightning in his eye, he said, Persephone, what are those seeds in your mouth? I said, yes, I did eat food there in the underworld. I had 6 pomegranate seeds and I was elated. It was like telling my beloved family about my first kiss, that first moment. And suddenly heads were shaking and my mother started wailing and clawing her hair and beating her breast. And I was so confused. I didn't know what I should do with this situation. Again, my father's ability to, like lightning, cut through a situation, said, Persephone, you have eaten the food of the dead. Therefore, you must return to the underworld. My heart leaping. I'm not showing it on my face. I can't wait to go back. But my mother weeping and crying. And he said, Demeter, I see that there is a blight upon the earth because your sorrow has extended out and our people must eat. And there must be abundance and fertility on the land again. And I know that your fertility and your generosity is linked to your own happiness and well-being. And without your daughter, you will not have that. So I will make a concession. Half of the year, you will live above ground with your mother. The other half of the year, you will go down and be with your beloved. And thus I became that hinge of what is called season. And over the years, it became like breathing. As I said, we are immortal elementals. Time is a moment to us. The seasons moved and it became like breath, where I would descend on my out breath. And on my next inhale, I'd already be ascending again. And above ground, and then again, descend down. And again, up onto the earth. And during this time, we all found a homeostasis and a synthesis with one another. My mother learned how to make vegetables and fruits that would bloom in the winter below ground and that would feed the people. And my husband learned how to communicate with mycelium and ask it once in a while to provide fruiting bodies for us that we call mushrooms after the rain, to remind me of his love as I was above ground. These mushrooms became an amazing ability and synthesis on this earth to decompose all kinds of things, to be both medicinal and medicinal to the landscape itself. And some were even medicinal to the human psyche and would be medicine from within. going in to help reconnect people to the ever abundant web of intelligent beauty that lives everywhere, above and below ground. And for many, many decades, many centuries, many millennia, there was balance. The above ground life of my mother, and then she got time to rest and rejuvenate herself. And then my husband's work and mine would begin, decomposing the dead, the old, and transforming it back into fertile elements to feed. And then I would come in spring, and the awakening, the orgasmic conjoining that would happen again. And everyone had rest, and everyone had enough. The last 200 years have felt like a blink to us. But I ask you now, what is the story that you are telling? Why do I come back month after month, year after year to see a poisoned and diseased mother and a very sad and burdened husband? I ask myself again and again, which is why I stand before you tonight. What is the story that we are telling? What is the story that is being told? And as I investigated, I would watch the natural cycle of season, that the below and above, the whole circle. Suddenly, it's only above. It's only produce. It's only consume, 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 eat, eat, eat. And then suddenly, all of you were making metal bodies with gears that would produce and produce and produce and produce things over and over and over, things that sometimes were only used one time. And then suddenly they were put into the ground, but not in any way that my husband could help decompose, because there was plastic around it, or metal. Not even the bodies of humans anymore were put in the ground in a way that could go back into the earth. A profound imbalance. And I wonder if maybe the hunger that we are watching is because everyone is so tired. Do you need to eat and consume because there is never a break? There is never stop. There is never enough. So I ask you now, what is the story of enough? What is that story? Because we don't know what to do. We gods, we elementals, we do not know what to do. So I've come to you with this story, not knowing how it ends, but I give it to you. I give it to you like a pomegranate in winter. I give it to you that its fruit might be rife with hope and juice and sweetness and profound, miraculous ability to change. And I ask you, what will you do with the story of enough? So I'd like to thank the myth of Persephone. I'd like to thank the oral tradition that brought us to it. I'd like to thank all the tellers who have told that story time and time again. I'd like to thank Sophie Strand and her work at the edges of mycelium and mythology and ecology. And now that I have given you that story, my question to you is, what will you do with that story? Okay, so thank you for that. Switching gears out of storyteller mode back into MC. So that story and so many of the themes that came out of it, as I said, informed by Sophie Strand's work, very much informed by the Boundary Project that I'm about to introduce. But to give you a break from me and to give you an amazing introduction, I'd love to introduce Juniper Blomberg. Juniper and I began our collaboration when we were talking to Irene Skyriver back there in the brown hat, beautiful, beloved, also fairy godmother. And we were at 4th of July, they were sitting on the side of the berm, they were by the LVM, and I said, Juniper, you love Oxford. I love Oxford. Let's bring you back to Oxford. Do you want to come play with me? And she said, yes, let's go. And so we started the Boundary Project, which I'll tell you more about. But I'd love to introduce Juniper and the, yeah, sure, if you'd like to use it, I'll turn it on.
Okay.
Yeah,
to talk about her storied objects and her process.
So I'm just going to pin this here because I tend to talk very quietly and I want to keep my mask on. So I'm so grateful to Nikyta. As she said, she's the one who got me into this project, and she is so wonderful because she's a weaver of stories and connections, and they expand all over the world and they happen in places you'd never imagine and in ways you'd never imagine. And so I really wouldn't be here without her and the stories that we share and the love of stories that we share. So this project, I jumped in sort of in the middle of it. There had been a chapter of the Boundary Project earlier in Oxford in the spring before I knew about it. But when I met Nikyta, we started talking and she said, I have these friends coming to Lopez and they're from Oxford and they're going to do a local eating challenge and make art and learn about the local food systems here, and I'd love for you to join us. And I said, okay. And so it was happening right away, and that's what we did. And our friends unfortunately got COVID, so they were in a shed trying to make art and learn about our food systems, which was really interesting. But they, with our help, ended up doing an artistic cartography of the island and of our food systems and what happens here, and maybe how we can share that wisdom and how one would approach engaging with those food systems when you are coming from somewhere else or going to another place. And so together with them, we made art and we wrote letters. You can read some of our letters here, because we were doing so much texting trying to stay in quarantine that we decided to take it from this very fast communication into a slow communication, so that it would be more in line with our project. It would be more edible and tasty. It would be more interesting, and it also was slow. And that's what we were trying to do by focusing on local foods. We're trying to slow down and find things that are nourishing, truly, that last, that we can use over and over and pass on and share, and aren't just about consumption and moving too quickly. So I came to this project for cartography and eating, and with my experience of growing up here with a family who loves food and loves land and is always trying to slow down and love their place better. So that's the history that I come from on Lopez, many, many years of it. And I'm very grateful to my grandparents and parents who do that and have taught me how to do that. So when I come to this project, I'm really interested in where we come from and how that informs our current relationships with place and our current relationships with people, and everything really. But for this next part of the project, Nikyta and I decided to make storied garments, things that we can wear, because we literally wear our food when we eat it. It becomes the warmth of our bodies. And also because of so many of the places that we come from and the people that we come from, they had to leave with only the clothes on their backs or only what they could carry. And that's a story that's very close to my heart and very true for some of my recent ancestors. And so I really wanted to honor them. And so I decided to make a garment that told some of their stories and some of the stories and relationships with place and food and people and animals, and where we come from and where we're going. So I made this piece that I'm wearing. I will do a turnaround so you can see. It's on the back here. I wanted to talk about community and food, but in order to do that, I felt like I had to talk about where we come from and how we see the world. And so on the back here, you can see this tree of life. which is a very old way of seeing the world. And I think it's a belief system that a lot of my ancestors have come from. I don't know that for sure because unfortunately I don't know everything about everybody, but that's what I have come to over and over again. And so I wanted to tell that story, and that's something that I see, that's a sort of a metaphor for a worldview that I see over and over in my daily life because I live in the forest and I come from people who love plants and trees especially. So I put the tree of life on here to talk about our interconnection. And on the top of it, it reaches up into the heavens. There's the sun and the moon and the stars with it. And on the bottom, the roots turn into mycelium, which with sort of no distinction. And that mycelium is a piece that Nikyta brought my attention to with this project. We've been talking so much about our connections and our interweavings and the things that happen below the surface. And so that mycelium reaches out and it sort of encircles around this vest and connects everything. And then on the panels here, I also wanted to talk about the foods that I eat and that I come from, but I also wanted to talk about the medicines that I work with, because that's what keeps me well enough to keep eating and to keep producing the things that I need to eat. And so on these side panels, I have plant allies that I work with. There's like mint and elecampane and elderberry, and some of those are very old and very ancestral medicines, and some of them maybe are a little bit newer into my lineage, but I eat them a lot, I work with them a lot, and I talk to them when I'm outside and I see them. So they're as much a part of my story as anything else. And then as far as the foods that I eat, when I started examining the system of foods that I eat and the community of that and what those stories were that I wanted to tell, I realized that a lot of the foods that keep me and my family alive today are foods that my people have been eating for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And when there are things like the stag and the pig on the back, the stag is part of our creation story in Hungary, where a lot of my ancestors come from. And so I wanted to honor that and put that in a very central place. So I have chickens, which we eat a lot of here, fruits and nuts and berries, and honeybees on my pockets. I feel like they're the sweeteners and the fatteners up, and they're the very fun things that you find in the woods and you stick in your pockets as a treat for later. And then I also have the stars, which I feel like are food of a different sort, perhaps. They're the light and the dark. And I didn't end up putting a lot of the plants that we eat besides like potatoes and grain. I didn't really go into that story, but those are quite a lot of our story as well. And that's really what keeps us fed and content. Oh yeah, thank you. I can't see what I'm talking about, so I forget. Because we live on an island, I felt it was so appropriate to have a sea bounding this garment, because the sea bounds where we come from. And wherever I am in the world, I feel like I have to cross the sea and go through fields and forests in order to return to my home, because I feel like I belong to so many different places and I love them with such intensity that I'm always drawn apart by them and drawn together by them. And so this ruffle on the bottom is the sea that surrounds us. And then the lace on top is sort of an ode to my great-grandmothers who were lace makers. And this isn't lace that they made, but I like to imagine that somebody's grandmother made it and I happened to come across it and put it on this garment. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I know that there are several events on Lopez tonight, and some of you may need to get going to them, so please feel free. I know that there's several lectures and things, and so I said I would help keep us crisp with timing. What's about to happen next is that I'll go into my storied garment, tell you a bit about that. We'll do a question and answer, and then you'll get the chance to come and explore some more of our local food systems and read some of the letters that we wrote as an installation. So, the amazing Juniper, my goodness. So I just want to name that I could not have done this without Juniper. And the only reason I was able to do this was because of Juniper and her family, her multi-generational family, who has helped me to do this. So this was local wool. And you can see that this is my first time really putting it on because I work a lot of jobs and let's see, it's all right. Oh my goodness, look, I have a dresser, it's amazing. So when we were talking about place-based food and slow living, I wanted something of our place. And our place is filled with sheep and fiber artists. And so I said, well, maybe I'll get some wool and I'll card it and I'll felt it and then I'll needle felt stories onto it. That'll be fun. And those of you who know Pamela Marston, yeah, what could go wrong? Those of you who know Pamela Marston, she came to me here at the library and she looked at me and she said, of course, Nikyta, of course, you would try like the hardest thing first. You would start slow. So this is a work in progress and it's still it's still being revealed, but it is local Lopez wool. So this came from my friend David Craggs, gave me a giant bag of wool and I don't know very much about wool. And every person I showed it to shook their heads and they were like, no, no, no. And thanks to Gabrielle Hall, who fished me out of the soup, in addition to Debbie and Maxine of Island Fibers, who also had beautifully prepared things. They all looked at me and said, you should put that wool in the compost. And I thought, well, that's kind of appropriate for my story. So I took that wool anyway, and I learned how to card it, and I learned how to felt it. And with the great help of Juniper and her mom, Elaine, who's here, I was able to wet felt this into this fabric. And just to be very clear, Debbie and Maxine had gorgeous, perfect roving, gorgeous local Lopez wool. And because of them, I have this lovely object because of their handiwork. So Gabrielle Hall of North Star Farms was so enthusiastic about this project. And so she has a beautiful farm and grain and sheep, and she does a lot of textile work. And so all of the dark color that you see and my bustle is a sheep called hollyhock. So this was hollyhock. And all the red that you see was wool that was dyed with a noxious weed, actually. That really makes a lovely dye. And then my carrot pocket over here is polypore dyed. So it's wool that was dyed with mushrooms. How perfect. And just days ago, Gabrielle ran in here managing one of her 4 children and handed me these like beautiful balls and tufts of hand-dyed beautiful wool. So that brings me to my thank yous, because I want to make sure these get in here. And I think Sandy already left, darn it, before I could thank her, because she's off to another event. Because really, I stand on the shoulders of giants. Like, I came here to this island 8 years ago, and I knew that I wanted to live in a sustainable way, but I didn't really know what that meant. And so all of you and everybody on Lopez has helped really teach me about what that means. So I've already thanked Gabrielle. I have to thank Joyce, my other fairy godmother, Joyce Briner, and Mary Jennison, who made this dress form. So without this dress form, when I founded the Remakery, bye friends, thanks for coming. Thank you. I said, oh, I was trying to needle felt on a body, but it was really hard. And I suddenly put like a owl on my liver, and I didn't really want it placed there. I really wanted it somewhere else. Wouldn't it be great if I had a whole dress form that was wool and I could needle felt on it? Joyce and Mary took this as a challenge. This is all upcycled from the Take It or Leave It. It is stuffed with wool, also local islands wool. It is reclaimed fabric, and this is obviously reclaimed beautiful lampstand. And so Joyce and Mary made this, AKA Dolly, and it will be my dress form forever, even though she's significantly smaller. She's aspirational body for me, really. And she's covered in wool because I've needle felted this entire thing. She's the most perfect thing to be able to sit on your lap and needle felt. And so just to explain my storied garment in the same way, everything that is here is something that grows or is a plant ally. So my husband, Jonathan, grows our whole garden. And it turns out that I really think gardening is a great idea, but I'm better at cultivating relationships than I am plants. So we eat a very local diet. Almost all the meat that we eat is local. A lot of the vegetables, I do a lot of trades where I teach yoga and then people trade me for vegetables, or we support all of our friends who are local farmers. But Jonathan is an amazing gardener, and he has our little garden patch. And I realized that all of the vegetables that are here on my desk, he grows in our garden. So potatoes and onion and garlic and tomatoes and carrot and beet. And who else have we got? This is the shaggy mane mushroom that just popped up right next to our door. And there's a giant one right next to our dryer vent that just appeared this week. And I was like, I see you, I'm gonna put you on my vest. And then the back is, the tree represents all trees. So apple trees and nut trees, obviously the pomegranate for Persephone. And then as I was going through, there's a sheep and a pig and a salmon and a chicken and a cow. And as I was needle felting each one, I was thinking of Sam and Emma, and I was thinking of Sam's lamb and Lopez Island Farms lamb, which is the only lamb that we eat. And I was thinking of the pig that David Zaplak raises, that we buy a whole pig every year. And then Jonathan beautifully prepares it and smokes it. And I was thinking of Libby and the chickens, because we support Libby and all of her local chickens. And I was thinking of Faith and David and their cows and Scott and Sweetgrass Farms and all of the farmers who we know who have built this food shed. And were it not for them and their hard work, we wouldn't have this. Or my boss, Darren, who's an amazing farmer of Lopez Farms and would bring in huge piles of vegetables that were extra from the farmer's market. So it's really standing on the shoulders of this whole community that's created the food shed that we're able to support. And I just want to also name that thanks to Sandy Bishop, who was here but went to the next event, Sandy and her local food eating challenge is what got me going on this. And when I brought the concepts of Lopez, the place-based nature of our culture, to Oxford. So I started the Boundary Project, and the Boundary Project was a collaboration between people from Oxford University and people from Berlin University. And we started in the spring, and then there was a symposium in Oxford in May. And when I brought this idea and the idea around the Boundary Project, or what are the healthy ecological boundaries, the story of enough, right? The story of how boundary can we be and to have healthy ecological bounds for what we do. And I brought the story of food from Lopez because we have so many amazing things. The locavores, huge thanks to the locavores, to the Transitions Lopez Island, to the Bounty Project and the book about the 30 local farms that make it very easy and accessible, to eating locally and seasonally from S&S Farms and our new S&S Farms friends here. So I really stand on the shoulders of giants, and it's our community that brought all of this together. Let me just make sure I didn't forget to thank my dad. If it wasn't for my dad back there with the white beard, this Oncorhynchus nercus is for you, Dad. And it's in the roots of the trees, because Juniper reminded me that they help with the fertilizing the trees, right? And the roots. And their eggs are inside those little roots. So there's this confluence between tree roots and salmon. But my dad is a salmon fisherman and has been his whole life. And if it wasn't for my dad, I wouldn't have been here on Lopez, because he's the one who fell in love with Lopez, brought us here thanks to the salmon. So it's there. And I think that that's it for thanks. Love to thank you for your time and attention tonight. We're going to open it up now to questions and answers for about 10-15 minutes, and feel free to ask questions of Ed and Juniper and myself and Rosie if you're interested. And then you'll be able to just come and get out of your seat and explore letters and look at things and touch them and whatever else. Yeah, go ahead.
So those of us who do have to go, will
Yes.
this be available at other times to look at?
Good question. I am bringing them to Oxford on Monday. But now that there's a request, I'll bring them back. Yeah, and just to say that these letters were they're on maps, and they were part of my friend Anya Glazer, who started the Boundary Project. She did a cartography of local food, hence the mapping. So she was mapping where all the stories came from that we were telling, because Juniper and I were eating all local for about 90% of our diet for 2 weeks, and figuring out where everything came from. And thank you for your question, because of that, I realized that it's all about relationship. And it's all these invisible relationships. Anya said, I could get the Bounty book, but I would still have no idea where to go. You have to know the farmer, and you have to know the person who has the thing, And so it was all about needing to reweave relationship, which is what got me going on mycelium, to needing to reweave relationship underground and within people to support healthy food sheds. And then of course, when food sheds get destroyed and there's tilled monocropping, you don't have mycelium in land. And so now farmers are trying to, and there's huge companies that are trying to get them to put spores, mycological spores,
in their crops so that they can increase their yields. So it's all about invisible relationships, and Anya was tracking that. And these were from Alchemy Arts Center, which is where we did a presentation in July. So other questions? Anybody else?
What's the noxious weed that makes such a
I
beautiful
can't
red?
remember, but we thought it was Japanese knotweed, but I can't remember. I will ask. So if you see Gabrielle Hall, you ask her. I don't remember. It was red berries. It was really red berries, and it wasn't from here. And they got like this, and they quarantined everything, but it makes a really archival, beautiful red. So, other questions?
This is recording.
Yes.
This is for Zoom, but is it a recording that you can listen to?
This is a recording, and we've recorded it. And when I get my druthers, I will upload it and put it on our website. Okay. So it'll be on our library web, on our website. So if you just go to tonight's event, hopefully soon I'll have it uploaded to YouTube, and then I'll post it there. Yeah. Other questions? Okay, thank you all so much for your time. One more round of applause for our amazing speakers.
Nikyta.
Feel free to come on up and touch and play with and look at. Thank you all in the Zoom.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Hey, Nikyta. Nikyta, could you show the garment?